name is Larry O'Connell. I'm the director in the National Economic and Social Council, and I'm delighted to open this seminar this morning. Firstly, I would really like to welcome everybody today. We have, I think, almost 200 participants joining us this morning, which is really fantastic and testimony to the work that's been done in this area and the interest in it. We also have a wonderful lineup of panelists who will be joining us through the morning. I'd also like to welcome our moderator, Professor Geraint Ellis, and to welcome the Minister. As with often happens, the Minister was due to join us for the first session this morning. That will still happen. Unfortunately, he has been delayed and is currently has an engagement in the Dáil, but he will be with us during the first panel, which we're delighted delighted about. I just want to make a few points before we just start this today. That the NESC work on shared island. Internally, we've used the following phrase to describe what we feel we're doing, and that is that we're about to listen and to learn. The focus of the work has been to listen to stakeholders, to citizens, to experts, both north and south, to develop a deeper understanding of the possibilities for cooperation and to work on an all-island basis. I just want to say there are a few key messages that are emerging from the work. One of I suppose the first message is that there really is a very solid foundation on which to think about a shared island and to build a shared island. And that foundation really is made up of the kind of examples, expertise, and willingness to work together that you're going to hear about throughout this morning's seminar. The second finding emerging in the work is that there really is a lot of scope to push that collaboration further and across the whole spheres of economic, social policy, environmental policy, and well-being. And I suppose a really important finding for us in the work at the moment is that there is a real sense that the area of climate and biodiversity is the most fertile area in which we can push that collaboration further. I think that reflects the sense of urgency in relation to climate change and biodiversity and loss, but also a real willingness across the island and a shared ambition to make real progress on this particular topic. And we're already seeing that the work that will be discussed this morning is having an impact in terms of work across government, and certainly ideas like the working groups that you'll hear about in Jean's presentation are already being discussed across government and in terms of how we can establish those type of working groups and make progress. Second last thing I'd like to do is to just mention, I think, the work that Jean Moore has done. Certainly all of the panelists that will join us this morning are now very familiar with Jean, because I think she's been in constant touch with people over the last 12 months on this project. The actual approach to this piece of work has been extremely participative. There was a public consultation, which you'll hear about. Probably a lot of people who are on the call as attendees were also engaged in that. So I really would like to thank Jean for the work that she's done in this area. And secondly, just to acknowledge that the project in NESC has been led by Helen Johnson, who you'll hear from at the close of the conference. I think as a piece of work which has now gone on for over 12 months. It is a hugely significant piece of work for NESC. It is one of the first times that NESC has explicitly done a piece of work which has looked at issues on an all-island basis. And in terms of the timetable, just for the larger piece of work, it is due to go to our council in December, and then in quarter one next year, we would hope that there will be a final, what we're calling comprehensive report, which would look across all areas, economy, social policy, environmental policy, and well-being. Finally, just to welcome Geraint Ellis today. We're really delighted that Geraint has been able to join us today and to moderate discussion. And Geraint, as many of you will know, is the Professor of Environmental Planning at the School of Natural and Built Environment in Queen's University in Belfast. And for almost 5 years now, 4.5 years, Geraint has been a member of NESC and has been hugely influential in shaping the work programme, and particularly our work programme in the whole area of environmental policy, climate change, biodiversity. So we've really been delighted to work so closely with Geraint for the last number of years, and we're delighted that he's going to moderate the discussion today. So it just remains for me to hand over to you, Geraint, and to wish everybody today well in the conversation, and hopefully we'll all learn lots more on this important topic. So I'll hand over to you, Geraint.
Thank you, Larry, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this launch of what is a really interesting and important report, I think. Before I hand over to Jean, who's going to give an overview of what the report says, can I just have some housekeeping? So just to quickly run through some of the functions that are available on the Zoom sort of interface. So if you want to be involved in the discussion or ask any speakers, if you go to the bottom of the main panel, as you can see on the slide here, you'll see the chat and Q&A functions. So please feel free to use the chat box to share your thoughts throughout the webinar, and make sure that the chat is set to panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your messages. If you'd like to ask any of our guests a question, simply click the Q&A button and type your question or comment in there. And if at any point in the webinar you can't hear me or any of the speakers, you can check on the audio settings, which are located at the bottom of your screen, where you configure and adjust your audio. If that doesn't help, go to the View Options panel located at the top of the screen and make sure you can click Mute and Share Sound, or simply drop a message to our event moderators and they'll do their best to help you. We're all getting used to this, so hopefully that's all quite clear to you. There's also provision for sort of joining the conversation through social media. So if you are going to do that, it would be really good if you could at least tag NESC Ireland at NESC Ireland and using the hashtag shared Ireland. So that would help continue the conversation beyond today's event as well. So let's make a start into the meat of the report. And can I introduce Dr. Jean Moore, who's Senior Policy Analysis with the National Economic and Social Council, and who has been leading all this work on biodiversity and climate. So Jean's going to give us an overview of the consultation, the findings, and so on. So over to you, Jean.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. It's great to see you. I'm going to give you some of the key findings from the Council's recent Shared Island Report on Climate and Biodiversity, and I'm delighted to be able to speak to you on a windy day where people are safely indoors and not struggling to reach us. So there are benefits of online events, and this is obviously one of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly set out the context of the work, and I'm going to draw on the rich consultation material. Would you move the next slide on, please? The clicker doesn't seem to be working for me. There, thank you. And then I'm going to provide an overview of the Council's recommendations and draw some conclusions. For me, the word shared was animated and energized in this project. Next slide, please. By the submissions and those working to bring pragmatic, creative and collaborative solutions forward. To all the students, particularly from Dublin City University, who made submissions as part of this course, including Marzia Doro and Dylan Murphy, who are with us today, the NGOs, farmers, local authorities, researchers, enterprises and organisations north and south. On behalf of the Council, I'd like to thank everyone who helped us bring us to this point. We are all aware of the increasing urgency to address the climate and biodiversity emergencies. Importantly, there's an increasing understanding of their interconnectedness. The rationale for considering environmental issues from a geographical perspective and collaboratively is convincing. Climate change and biodiversity loss are issues that are indifferent to geographical boundaries. On this island, birds migrate, fish swim on shared rivers, we share the air and climate, as well as experience impacts and extreme weather events in similar ways. The intention to bring down emissions and protect nature is evident across the island. Ultimately, Ireland and Northern Ireland will each need to bring about environmental results. However, the core argument in this report is that the challenge of protecting our natural assets and reducing polluting emissions lends itself to integrated and collaborative solutions. consultation paper we published in February set out the policy and environmental context, and in it we invited submissions and engagement. The key question underpinning this work was, to what extent does the scope exist to strengthen cooperation and collaboration across the island, and specifically the potential for tangible actions on climate and biodiversity? The main messages that came from this process was that there was a strong welcome for the paper and process, acknowledging the need for it and the value of beginning this conversation. There was also a strong focus on an integrated and holistic approach to looking at climate and biodiversity, along with broader sustainable development, rather than as distinct issues. The emphasis was practical and positive, emphasizing the need for support for collaborative action, building on multiple existing networks and on what has already been achieved, as well as to capture new opportunities. The submissions came from individuals, government and representative organisations, NGOs, business, academics, and originated from across the island. While there was more from individuals and organisations in Ireland, perhaps more familiar with the work of NESC, submissions also came from Northern Ireland and all Ireland organisations. And meetings were also held with 38 expert researchers, NGOs, government departments and national organisations, including with Northern Ireland organisations and researchers. And as part of a series of focus groups on the Northwest region, one explored green transformation with 18 participants, and our thanks to Katrina Mullen for facilitating those. The ideas and views expressed varied from focusing on a broad, integrated and collaborative approach to specific substantive environmental challenges and opportunities in relation to energy, illegal waste, resource use, water quality, marine conservation, coastal erosion, nature-based solutions. Others drew attention to the importance of core elements like engagement. Science Foundation Ireland, for example, made the point that nature and our atmosphere protect and enhance the island of Ireland. But to maintain and improve these assets requires societal engagement, innovative thinking and collaboration. Today, we are delighted to have so many in the panels of those who made submissions or who talked to us about their ideas, experience and ambition for climate and biodiversity action across the island. We will hear about the work on pollinators, circular economy research, local authorities working collaboratively, students, researchers, business, NGOs and public bodies working on environmental issues. There were three broad themes in this work. And the first was in relation to ambition. In relation to climate, both jurisdictions on the island have declared climate emergencies. They share similar greenhouse gas profiles and have international commitments to meet in relation to the Paris Agreement, Agenda 2030, and the targets set out in the UN Convention on Biological Diversity for 2030 and beyond. Suggested actions related to reducing rural transport emissions, the value of a common stance on fossil fuel subsidy fade out, and an all-island approach to delivering a just transition. Examples of innovative practice were outlined, such as the Belfast Climate Commission, established to translate climate policy into action on the ground to bring about transformative change. Ambition for biodiversity was also a strong theme, with many outlining how it has not received the same amount of attention or resources as the climate challenge across the island, despite its value and significance. A frequently cited example of innovative practice was the All-Island Pollinator Plan, which we will hear more about shortly from Dr. Una Fitzpatrick. Others called for a common vision for nature-based or wildlife-friendly farming and outlined that working with farmers and listening and visioning with them is the way forward for the approach to climate as well as biodiversity across the island. And the last ambition that came out really strongly was to develop an all-island circular economy. And Professor Michael Morris will be talking about this shortly. And also focus on the potential of the bioeconomy to bring maximum benefit from resources, infrastructure, and materials, as well as reuse and waste management. A second theme was on the shared experience. Environmental protection is underpinned by formal structures, implementation bodies, and areas of cooperation already in place under the Good Friday Agreement, such as the North-South Ministerial Council, Waterways Ireland, Irish Lights, and the Lochs Agency. Collaborative work across the island is ongoing on river catchments and water quality, monitoring and protecting birds and other species, peatland restoration, tackling invasive alien species and illegal waste. But there are networks working across the island in other areas such as energy, environmental research and collaborations that are clearly evident between local authorities, environmental NGOs, heritage officers, ecologists, social enterprise and business. And there's much to be learned from this common experience and practice. And some of this is more visible than others. I was struck by the words of a heritage officer in Monaghan County Council, Shirley Clerkin, that the work of conservation isn't always visible, particularly for nature-based solutions. The shared research supported by the EU Interreg and Horizon 2020 programs has also contributed to significant marine water quality, peatland restoration, bioeconomy, and other projects as part of this shared experience. Departments have collaborated on marine and agricultural research, north and south. And the EPA engages with environmental agencies across the UK and across the island through its research programme. Dr. Emer Cotter will tell us more about that. And the new All-Island Climate and Biodiversity Research Network is a really welcome initiative, which Professor Tamsin Crowe will say a few words about shortly. Business collaborations have long been established, such as between IBEC and the Confederation of British Industry, and we'll hear from Michael Darcy on this. And Chambers Ireland and Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce and Industry collaborate on climate and sustainable development challenges, and environmental NGOs have increasingly collaborated, and we'll hear more from Aoife Ní Lachlan and Sean Kelly on this. But before I leave these key things, I think it's important to say the challenges were also identified in the low levels of all-island research to date, and the difficulties of comparing and readily accessing data to address common environmental issues. The need for more societal engagement, critical for the development of ambitious climate action, adaptation, and the need to restore nature were all mentioned. Other challenges identified include the potential risks of regulatory divergence as policies and practices are still evolving post-Brexit. And the third theme was shared opportunities. Opportunities exist in the efficient integration of renewable energy. There is a need for further alignment of policies, incentives, and market structures across the island. This would help to ensure a safe, secure, sustainable, and affordable electricity supply, which we're all grateful of today. And for those of you who are without electricity or somehow managing to join us, I'm really grateful. The learning from the all-island single electricity market could be applied to other renewable energy solutions going forward, such as offshore wind energy. And as mentioned, the circular and bioeconomy would be significant in terms of optimizing resource efficiency and economies of scale and creating jobs across the island. Another key area for opportunity is in relation to coastal and marine protection adaptation, to continue cooperation and the sharing of information, experience, and best practice. The Council's recommendations fall into those three broad areas. Firstly, in relation to shared ambition, the Council recommends the development of a shared and inspiring vision for integrated climate and biodiversity action across the island through a joint statement of common purpose. This could really help make intentions and existing practices more explicit and used more strategically to galvanize action, build public support and awareness, and deliver results. This could include a commitment to work collaboratively across sectors and communities. There is potentially a role for the North-South Ministerial Council in this. And the preparation and reflection of such a statement of common purpose could help and inform and progress the Irish government's commitment in the programme for government to develop an all-island strategy on climate and biodiversity. This work could help support the coordination of regulations that can drive the transition in both jurisdictions in complementary ways. In terms of shared experience, we can see common experiences exist in relation to environmental challenges, but as I mentioned, these can be hidden or duplicated or lacking in impact due to their invisibility. And we need to shine a light on some of this invisible work. Strong examples of working in partnership exist, such as the approach to river basin management, which is based on years of working collaboratively in response to the EU Water Framework Directive. It is important to learn from the bodies who are working together and cooperating to implement that regime. Expertise is evident in many spheres, which if combined with effective means of broader public engagement, could be used to deepen dialogue on the current context and future. A distinct funding stream should be created for mapping and exploring the work of existing environmental networks across all sectors in Ireland and Northern Ireland. In addition, the Council sees value in a coordinated series of all-island conferences on key themes to include in the first instance, circular economy and bioeconomy, renewable energy, marine conservation and adaptation, and water quality and management. There is enormous value in interdisciplinary cross-jurisdictional research collaborations, particularly around key societal and environmental missions that should be deepened and strengthened. The introduction of new funding opportunities, such as the North-South Research Programme, is welcome. The Council recommends the development of strategic working groups to provide a focus and setting for collaborative, forward-looking discussion and formulation of advice on shared opportunities in key areas. These could include sustainable agriculture, given the many similarities in the two jurisdictions, and to create opportunities to share practices, research and innovation. All-island opportunities from a circular and bioeconomy, given the potential economies of scale and the resulting opportunity to gain competitive advantage. This is timely as both jurisdictions are developing circular economy strategies. Collaborations on renewable energy is a significant area of opportunity for North-South cooperation. Valuing networks for nature. There is enormous potential to build on the progress of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan and to build further discussion on issues such as nature recovery networks and a wildlife web, developing linkages or corridors of natural vegetation between existing conservation areas. In relation to marine and coastal adaptation to climate and its impact, the focus of a working group could include specific challenges such as flood, water management, coastal erosion, and the impacts of a rise in sea levels. However, the challenges of delivering ambitious action should not be underestimated, with a need to focus on effective implementation. Multiple environmental challenges exist, and action on one may have unintended consequences on another. There's always added complexity in seeking to work and coordinate across jurisdictions. And finally, to conclude, the consultation gave voice to a strong shared ambition and vision to act on an all-island basis to address environmental challenges. The report presents in more detail than I had time for this morning the degree to which there is common ground that can form the basis for a more collaborative approach going forward. Connections to nature and place are deeply felt by many across the island, and this is key to environmental engagement. This shared island is a place where creative engagement, cooperation, and ambitious action to protect nature and our planet can flourish. I look forward to the rest of the event, and many thanks to everyone for joining in, our moderator and all the panelists for taking part today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jean. And for anyone who has maybe any questions that came directly from those slides and questions, if you could post them into the question and answers, we can maybe address those towards the end of the event. So next we've got three panels. I mean, as Jean said, this area is incredibly rich in terms of opportunities and current collaborations, and we wanted to give a flavour of that. Unfortunately, that means that each of the speakers only have just a few minutes to give a highlight to what they're doing. So I very much appreciate if any speakers can keep on time, and apologise for the limited time we've got. We're going to start with panel one, but when the Minister does join us, we'll maybe suspend the panel, go to him, and then reconvene the panel afterwards, if that's okay. He won't be with us for very long. So let's go to the panel one discussion, and panel one is largely about existing collaborations and the richness that they provide and the benefits that they provide already on an all-island basis. So our first speaker is Dr. Una Fitzpatrick, who's a senior ecologist from the National Biodiversity Centre, who's going to be talking about the All-Island Pollinator Plan. So Una, over to you.
Thanks, Geraint, and thank you for inviting me today. I'm delighted to be here. I'm just going to tell you a wee bit about the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. I work in the National Biodiversity Data Centre, where we manage information on Ireland's wildlife. And so, you know, there's 100 different types of bees in Ireland, and unfortunately 1/3 are threatened with extinction. So, you know, that's a huge issue for pollination. At the same time, you know, there's research going on around the world and in Ireland, particularly in Trinity College Dublin, explaining why it's happening and what we could do about it. So I suppose what happened with the pollinator plan was that Professor Jane Stout in Trinity and I came together and, you know, decided, well, we should try to produce some sort of framework to address this. So we developed, you know, an initial draft, and then we called together an all-island steering group. We then developed that further, and that became the first All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, which ran from 2015 to 2020. It had 81 actions. And right from the very start, there was huge buy-in right across the island for the approach. So it was supported by over 100 governmental and non-governmental organisations. Really, a key premise of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan has been to identify evidence-based biodiversity actions for all sectors. And then we use pollinators as that vehicle. So, you know, we've been working with farmers and councils, transport authorities, local communities, gardeners, and so on. And I think the important thing to say about that is that each of those evidence-based guidelines was really carefully written to be equally applicable, you know, in Tipperary as it is in Tyrone. You know, that involves, you know, being really careful around the content and the language of those documents. So to say, we've been very fortunate. People really have bought into the plan. It's been successful, and we have, I advise, other countries within the EU and wider afield who want to do something similar. Thankfully, people were willing to continue. We developed a new plan for 2021 to 25, this time 186 actions, even more partners across the island, agreeing to come on board to help deliver. And I suppose the crux of this is, how important has that island-wide approach been? And to be honest, it has just been nothing but a positive. We've been able to share knowledge, we've been able to share expertise across both jurisdictions, we've been able to coordinate funding opportunities. Just a couple of really quick examples. 87% of all councils now across the island are formally supporting the plan and agreeing to take action for biodiversity for pollinators on their land. And it's just been an incredible process of sharing knowledge and expertise. There's 42 councils in total. There's a lot more power in sharing across 42 than there is in knowledge sharing across 31 or 11 respectively. And there's been so many amazing initiatives. There's the Don't Know, Let It Grow initiative that was pioneered by Causeway Coast and Glensborough Council, but now has spread right across the island, and we see that just across so many sectors when you're able to bring people together and share knowledge and expertise. So really, all transport authorities across the island are working on the plan. Farmers, we've got an Irish pollinator research networks with participants right across the island. And I suppose lastly, just to say, so many local communities have really got on board. In the south, tidy towns have been amazing. There's a special pollinator award. Just, communities have done amazing things. And at the minute we're discussing how to replicate the success of that in Northern Ireland. So again, just I suppose to finish up is, can shared island collaboration make a real difference to biodiversity? The answer is 100% yes, if you have that positive, pragmatic and inclusive framework to work within. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Una. That was great. So any questions that may be directly to Una, again, if you can type those in. Let's move on then to Kathy Burns, who's a climate program manager at Derry City and Strabane District Council, who's just going to talk a little bit about how they are working with Donegal County Council on climate and biodiversity. Kathy?
Yep, good morning.
Hi.
Thank you very much for inviting me along here this morning to speak about our experience in the Northwest. And just building on what Una was saying there, it has very much led to increased collaboration and project delivery for us as two councils, and we've been very much involved as well in the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. I suppose through the Northwest Strategic Growth Partnership and Regional Development Group structures, cross-border climate and biodiversity collaboration is in the Northwest. Structures are in place, including a Northwest Green Transformation and Climate Action Working Group, with officers from Derry City and Strabane District Council and Donegal County Council. And then building on individual council commitments and plans, such as Donegal County Council's Climate Action Charter, Derry City and Strabane District Council's Climate Change Pledge. The two councils have jointly also committed to the EU Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. Partners have worked at the strategic level to agree a Northwest Green Transformation Statement and a shared ambition for the region. And we've also collaborated on a Northwest Regional Energy Strategy and an emerging Northwest Climate Action Plan and Framework, which will set a regional target for net zero and resilience in the region by 2045. As well as those strategic collaborations and those strategic plans and frameworks, we've also continued to collaborate at a practical level on the ground with, as I said, practical actions such as delivery of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan initiative, youth and engagement projects, development of museums and heritage propositions, as well as our planning officers creating their own network between the two councils to look at spatial planning in the region and how that can obviously support and further develop climate action and biodiversity. At the moment, partners are currently working on the necessary governance arrangements to look at what we need to put in place to continue to drive forward this action, and plans are in place for a regional Northwest Energy and Climate Agency. So in terms of the ongoing shared ambition, this is now being translated into a framework and roadmap for continued cross-border multi-agency working. Impacts then have included obviously increased collaboration and project delivery, risk reduction, and continued citizen engagement as I outlined, and crucially knowledge exchange as well. We're doing a lot of work at the minute between the two councils around data and information which is key. And especially when we're thinking about things like our greenhouse gas emissions, our risk analysis, climate impact profiles, things like that, as well as even looking at how we monitor and report on those. And we see that as a really critical issue, especially for things like greenhouse gas baselines and targets, so that we can continue to communicate effectively and create cross-scientific targets across. We also are continuing to work on funding opportunities and looking at how we can continue to work smarter and avoid duplication, because as we all know, climate change and the biodiversity crisis doesn't respect the border. We, even as two councils, have a lot of cross-border workers, and we need to consider how we factor that into our risk and our adaptation planning in the Northwest. So that's really a very quick roundup of all the initiatives that there's still a lot more to be done, but that will all culminate in our Green Transformation Strategy and Northwest Climate Action Plan.
Great, thanks very much for that insight. And let's move on then. Let's move on to Marzia Doro, who's a part-time student in the DCU Climate Change Policy Media and Society Master's Programme, who also made a submission to the consultation and wanted to make a few points about the benefits of collaborative approach. So Marzia?
Yes, thank you, Geraint. I suppose the main topic of my submission was on the social aspect of biodiversity conservation. Biodiversity is the fundamental pillar of our well-being, of our access to clean air, water, and food. And it also helps us to adapt to the effect of a changing climate. But to appreciate the importance of biodiversity, we need people and community to see nature around them, to see biodiversity, to live it and experience it. And so we need to create a culture that actually cares about protecting biodiversity. And to do that, environmental education is key. We have already in the island some very nice examples. We have the Education for Sustainable Development Forum in Northern Ireland. And in the Republic, we have Antashka and its environmental education unit. And these two initiatives already provide key environmental education to individuals, to volunteers, and to children in particular. But we need environmental education to be accessible to all members of society, because societal change comes with the participation of the whole of society, and not only children or particular parts of it. So perhaps these kind of initiatives should be mainstreamed and extended beyond the borders. And in order, to develop a network of knowledge transfer and to identify common models, to know better the needs of a local level, but also to understand how this biodiversity crisis is actually a global crisis and knows no border. So perhaps the institution of an environmental education unit that is of a whole island level, it's probably one way to do this and to create important cooperation between North and South. So that's in brief was my submission. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that very comprehensive view of things. We do know that there is a high level of existing collaboration North and South between NGOs, and so the last two speakers of this panel will talk a little bit about that. So we have Dr. Aoife McLaughlin from the Irish Environmental Network and Sean Kelly from the Northern Ireland Environmental Link. We're just going to say a few words about the work that they do. So Aoife, do you want to go first, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Jean and the team at NESC for producing a really excellent report. So how does the Irish Environmental Network cooperate on an all-island basis, and what are we trying to achieve? So as we know, civil society plays an important role in environmental protection and policy making, from undertaking conservation projects to research to advocacy for stronger government policy and implementation. As umbrella organisations, the IEN and our Northern Ireland counterpart, Northern Ireland Environment Link, have a history of working together to advocate for all-island solutions to those shared environmental problems. And one of these, of course, is Brexit, where we identified a gap in the knowledge in the general public and political discussion around what impact the withdrawal of the UK from the EU might have on the environment on the island. So we commissioned a research report to identify the main risks to the environment and to examine the potential for the Good Friday Agreement bodies to mitigate some of those risks. The research was initiated to help NGOs on both sides of the border advocate for the advancement of all-island environmental policy, but the resulting report helped to extend this extremely technical debate into the public sphere. In the last year, we have gained a clearer, although you could argue incomplete view of what the new regulatory and governance environment looks like, but not how NGOs can successfully engage in advocacy on an all-island basis. As we've often argued, it's difficult for civil society to engage with the work of the Good Friday Agreement bodies. So now we have identified a new gap in our shared knowledge and discussion. How do we enhance cross-border NGO engagement on all-island environmental issues? Are there experiences or models of cooperation in other EU member states that border third countries that we can learn from? To answer these questions, we've commissioned a new research report, which will be complete in the first half of 2022, which is being accompanied by dialogues with our membership on both sides of the border to work on identifying those NGO, all-island shared environmental objectives and priorities. The results of this research should really help us increase the impact of our all-island advocacy. And now I'll hand over to Sean.
Thank you, Aoife, and thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity from NESC to attend this important event today. I'd just like to make a couple of additional points in support of what Aoife has said. I think since the decision by the EU government to hold a referendum on the EU membership, I would add that, but only by through working together, Neil and IEN have been able to gain access to key decision makers in Belfast, Dublin, London, and indeed Brussels, where we raised or shared issues around the potential threat to environmental governance right across the island and the risk that divergence would cause in terms of our environmental standards north and south. And this is simply something we couldn't have achieved by working alone in isolation. However, despite the successes of all-island cooperation on environmental issues, the lack of resources within the NGO sector in particular has limited our ability and that of our members to undertake the depth of cooperation that we think is required and that we think would be that we need to have in terms of making a greater impact in halting biodiversity loss. Biodiversity loss is still happening across the island and much more needs to be done. But I think we've agreed that if we are serious about the issue, then a strategic all-island cross-sector approach is required with the necessary resources provided to make this happen. And I know this is something that's been touched upon by Jean earlier in reference to the NESC report. Lots of individual and great projects are taking place, but we must ensure that cooperation is strategic on an all-island basis, rather than perhaps the risk of over-reliance on individual or piecemeal projects, no matter how good these are, and a lot of very good work is going on, but I think we need a more strategic all-island approach. And one aspect of that could be there's a lot of good cross-border work going on, but we need to also transfer it into all-island as well as in addition to the good cross-border work. Finally, I think we obviously have to acknowledge that environmental decline was happening in the island of Ireland pre-Brexit. But following the Brexit vote, there is a risk that divergence in standards and oversight, etc., may make things worse. That's why Neil and IEN are working together to try to improve environmental governance post-Brexit and to support the empowerment and participation of environmental NGOs and citizens, north and south, in the design and delivery of all-island solutions to the climate and biodiversity crisis. And that's something I hope that all delegates here and their members, of course, will be hearing more about in the new year. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you very much to all those panelists. The timing was excellent, made life a lot easier for us. We'll come back to some of the issues raised then, but we're delighted that Eamon Ryan, TD, as Minister for Environment, Climate, Communications and Transport, has joined us, who's going to say a few words about the all-island context for his brief. Minister.
Thank you very much, Professor Ellison. And first, I have to apologise for everyone. I'm slightly late for joining them. There was a motion in the Dáil at 10 that I had to speak to, so Apologies coming in slightly late, but I'm very glad to be here, and I think it's really significant and important that this work is progressing. I recall, was it February last year, we had that meeting with stakeholders on the shared island kind of dialogue basis, and it's maybe it's a bit long. Maybe we need to quicken up, but we are progressing, and the work that's been done in the interim by NESC, I think, is really significant and important, and deepens our kind of understanding that this is an area where there's real potential collaboration. In the wider context, just if I can, I have to recognize, coming out of Glasgow, we have a common climate goal. It should unite us, and we won't be able to achieve it without taking a shared island approach. In fact, we won't be able to achieve it without taking a shared islands approach. We won't be able to meet our renewable energy targets or decarbonize our economy without working east-west as well as north-south. But it's not just climate. In our biodiversity goals, it's a common UN agreed targets that should and will, please God, all going well, transform what we do in the next decade to meeting our obligations within the UN biodiversity targets. And you could go on from there. The Sustainable Agenda, the 2030, 17 development goals. It was very interesting meeting with David O'Donoghue, one of the authors, well, one of the civil servants rather, who was instrumental in getting those 17 SDGs agreed. SDG 17 is all about partnership. It's all about not recognizing borders and actually setting up informal new structures to meet sustainable development goals. And I think some of the work we're doing here is an example of exactly that under the SDG Goal 17, innovative governance approaches. We already have good structures to deliver this. And one of our earlier meetings, Aoife, I remember you were chairing it here in government buildings even before that shared stakeholders event. I think one of the points we came to was recognizing that the Good Friday Agreement gives us a lot of the structures, some of them unused to date, that may be of help in this partnership approach towards meeting our sustainable biodiversity climate goals. And so I think what we should be looking to do here is to use those existing structures. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, but put them to good use in what we seek to achieve. I think in that, the Shared Ireland unit within the Department of Taoiseach is a very important vehicle. The significance of that, we set out in our National Development Plan, where we set up the Shared Island Fund up to €1 billion to help to put kind of real capability behind some of these dialogues, to give the mechanism to test and pilot and fund projects that the dialogues might see as kind of the next step for some of this sort of partnership approach. So, and I think there's in that NDP as well, there are a variety of different investment objectives, which are naturally on an all-island basis. Our EV charging network, cars don't cross the border. Our whole renewable energy approach won't work on a two-island. If we lose our single electricity market and collaboration on energy, it'll be incredibly expensive. It will debilitate the ability to develop and bring other industries. It will make decarbonization really difficult. So there's some areas where it's just so obvious we have to collaborate to make it work. And we could go on. I mean, in the key issue of nature protection, we again that the border it's not material in effect in terms of how we actually improve water quality, follow river basin management practices, follow good conservation practices. The pollution crosses borders in a way that has to be managed, has to be addressed, has to be recognized. So this shared island unit and these shared island dialogues it's perfectly appropriate that these cross-border challenges, and I suppose lastly two final points why it just makes sense for us to work in this way. But firstly, by creating a level playing field in terms of good environmental standards either side of the border, it may be one of the best ways of addressing one of the other challenges, the whole challenge around the protocol, around checking and goods trade and border management of traded goods. A lot of the concern on that is in regards to products coming out of our food system and our farming systems, nature-based products, if you put it that way. By having the same environmental standards will help us address a lot of those border protocol issues, because it'll be a level playing field in environmental standards. And lastly, it also helps North and South on us actually trading on a genuine origin green brand, that if we really get this right, we will have the great benefit and capability of in what is an exporting industry, both North and South, for our food systems, our farming systems, be able to actually say, yes, this is coming from an island where we have pristine water, where we restore pristine water, we've lost it, where we restore biodiversity, we have lost it, we have to act. It's not like maintain the status quo here, it's radical change and reform is what we need. So these needs, this opportunity to trade on an origin green brand is what will drive and make sense of this work. There's so many other different aspects to this in terms of how we use Peace Plus program, how we recognize the fact that the National Biodiversity Data Centre, supported by the National Parks and Wildlife Service and the Northern Ireland Environmental Agency, are already developing some of these obvious online databases and online cooperation in information. We need to go further now. So lastly, sorry for speaking for a few minutes, but I want to commend NESC for their report, in a sense backing up this understanding within government that this is an area where we have to engage in strategic partnership and collaboration. And I think, as Gretchen said earlier, slightly, not frustrated, but saying 8-10 months since the last meeting, let's not make it as long here. And I think we should be using that NESC report, government taking it and running with it. We're in collaboration with our colleagues up north and with the NGOs and academic sectors. My sense in this is that people have been glad to have this forum and this mechanism to advance partnership and collaboration. I think the NESC report doubles down on the good common sense behind that, and I look forward to working with the Taoiseach and the Department of the Taoiseach to try to use this shared island space to the max to deliver on this partnership and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for the sort of the political highlighting the opportunities and the political endorsement for this work. I know you can't stick around for much longer, so many thanks for joining us anyway and for addressing. We have had a bit of a panel. We were going to go back to the panel to raise some issues that may have come from that. We've got maybe 15 minutes to have a quick discussion around those things. If I could just start, though, there's a couple of questions.
You don't mind if I stay, Professor Ellis?
Yeah, of course. More than welcome. Yeah, if I could quickly go to Jean, there's a few questions for Jean as you've come in on yours. One of which is you highlighted where the responses for the consultation came, and you highlighted that only 8% came from Northern Ireland. And I'm wondering whether you could maybe have some comment on why you thought that was the case.
Yes, well, in fact, there were more from all island bodies that sort of hide some of that Northern Ireland perspective. But overall, I mean, there was more than a quarter, in terms of the submissions that would have reference to Northern Ireland. And then in the interviews, there was again more than a quarter of the people I spoke to directly that would have a Northern Ireland perspective. I think obviously NESC is an Irish body and we're very well known here. We're not as well known in Northern Ireland, and as much as we tried to reach out, I think it's just that. It's just that it wasn't perhaps as high a level of a kind of a focused thing to do to engage on a submission with NESC. But it was the first time NESC has ever done a shared island piece of work on climate and biodiversity. So I think there's a lot of relationship building and networks establishing now. So I think that partly helps to explain why NESC particularly, we only had a very short window as well. We had 4 weeks, so there was very limited amount of additional work that we could do on that.
Okay, before I just ask any of the panelists if they have a comment, a question come in that Minister, you may want to answer actually, although it was directed maybe at Jean, is that from Barney Toe, and it suggested that, you know, the all-island approaches are quite laudable, but given the dramatic changes in the climate and biodiversity, there's a sort of maybe an impatience about how quickly this can be turned into action. So I don't know whether you have any insights or suggestions about how quickly actions can come out of the report that NESC has done.
I go back to what I was saying earlier. I think the quicker the better. Climate is strange. We just had a big review from the Climate Advisory Council yesterday saying we need to quicken up and go to delivery, and there's this incredible sense of urgency, correctly. But then there's that old Latin maxim, festina lente. You have to get it right, and so it's a bit mix of, and particularly when it comes to all island and shared, you know, that what Jean said there about this is the first time we've done this sort of work on an all island basis. So I have a great sense of urgency. We will pick up and follow the recommendations from NESC, and I think we all of us have the question to ask, well, how quickly do we want to work here? And my sense is with great urgency. I don't think there'll be any reluctance within Irish government in terms of being ambitious and being proactive here. I think it makes real sense.
And Jean, did you want to comment on that in terms of the timetable of taking NESC works forward? And particularly maybe Brian O'Gallagher has asked about a specific question, maybe about taking it forward, about strategic working groups, and whether you have any insights into how they are going to be formed and when and so on.
Well, as Larry mentioned at the outset, I mean, I think there's already interest in a lot of the areas, and hopefully we're going to hear more about some of those areas like circular economy work developing in that area. I think with all NESC work, we tend to take a lot of effort to get it, the consultation, the work, and we get the report out, and then we let it sit for a little bit to see how it lands, and it sounds like it's landing very well, but we haven't yet you know, engaged in further discussion on some of the key recommendations. But I think that the focus of the strategic groups is very practical. It picks up on a lot of the work that's already happening. For example, in the marine area, there's already networks established, so some of them resonate with work in circular economy, in the marine, renewable energy. Again, there's strong network. So I think it was just to kind of give a coherent and a coordinated approach, a structured approach that's been called for, to try and name them. But it's not as if none of that work is already going on, but I can't give you a formal answer as to which of them will be established in due course, but hopefully not too long. We'll have some more to say on that.
Thanks. And just going to the other panelists, I mean, we've heard very quickly a lot of examples. I don't know if that sparked off any comments other people want to make about how you're working already in this area. Does anyone want to maybe make a suggestion on what they've heard from the other panelists?
Chair, if I can
sure.
comment, sorry, just in relation to actually one of the points made in response to Jean earlier on, in terms of participation of Northern Ireland groups, organisations in the research. My own viewpoint, that probably from the ENGO point of view, I think a lot of it is to do with capacity, and that is something that when I think a lot of our member organisations and indeed ourselves, when you're struggling along with the environmental policies, strategies, consultations, all the stuff within your own region, to use that phrase, within Northern Ireland, then there is an obvious awareness of the fact that we need to be looking at these issues on an all-island, shared island basis, obviously climate change, biodiversity, etc. But it is actually the capacity to do so. And then in addition to that, from January, obviously in Northern Ireland, we're currently, the new architecture is that we have two types of environmental law or legislation, you know, the retained EU law, and then the bits covered directly by Europe in terms of the protocol. Trying to get our heads, etc., all around that as well has been really quite difficult. And therefore, I think, and this may be reflected in the level of responses to this particular piece of work, and even Jean's consultation process, excellent and all as it is and was, I think a lot of it is just like for capacity issues in terms of that, and some of the issues raised by the minister and stuff as well, is that we know the urgency. I think they know the importance. I think we know what needs to be done. It's just right. okay, let's look around within our particular organizations, who can help take this forward, and give it the energy that it needs and requires. So I think for us, that's an ongoing issue, but I would never underestimate the importance and realization. And that's something that in Northern Ireland Environment Link that we have to do, keep an eye on north-south stuff and also east-west stuff as well. So
I'm going from there as well, whether there needs to be some formalization of some arrangement. So Minister, a question has come in from Anthony Brogan that asks whether you agree that a formal bilateral agreement might be needed with Northern Ireland on climate goals in the light of COP26.
Yeah, I'm very glad that my colleague Claire Bailey up north there, her bill has got through. I think it's to the next stage, and we are ready. I've been in discussion with her. Our people are sharing notes in terms of how we do manage that. It is climate and all the key issues. If you look at the big emissions areas, energy, we have to collaborate. We have similar all-island targets on renewables, and so that's happening. Transport, we're collaborating. I work very closely with Minister Nicola Mallon. We have an all-island shared rail review at the moment. It won't work. I mentioned EV charging as an example, but transport, there is actually quite extensive collaboration. And the third big area of emissions for us, I always found, meeting with Minister Poots as Minister of Responsibility for the area, that he was very attuned to the reality that for Northern Ireland farmers, they would benefit from being part of an all-island Origin Green trade brand, and now we have to deliver that in reality. That doesn't, in my mind, exist in reality. Things have to change so we restore our biodiversity and water quality so that we can live up to that brand. But we're all agreed on that as the correct business strategy. And so in that area, again, there's common interest. And lastly, even on some of the industry side, on the the development of new hydrogen power supplies and so on, again, there's a real clear understanding that this works on an all-island basis. Like, I mean, on the industrial side, Belfast Port will benefit from the developments in the Irish Sea. It doesn't matter which side of the border it's on when it comes to developing the wind industry, offshore wind industry. So a lot of, there is in key sectors around climate, there's a realization that collaboration, particularly, I mean, unless you want to, well, it's the only way of working it. So then when coming, the legislation is one thing, but it's in the delivery now that's where we're really focused. And I think we're not far away from, in energy and transport and in agriculture, particularly, and in industry, the four key pillars. There's a very strong understanding of the benefit of collaboration.
Thanks very much. I mean, the capacity is clearly a strong issue, given the number of organisations involved, and Sean raised that issue as well. So, Cathy, I don't know if you want to say something about the capacity, because clearly you are working cross-border at the minute with Donegal, about the capacity or constraints or the motivations that your council has put into that.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Harris. Yeah, I suppose in terms of capacity, it's actually we actually had a meeting yesterday of the Local Government Climate Action Network, facilitated by Climate Northern Ireland. And all councils in Northern Ireland are saying the exact same thing as regards capacity, resources. The will is there, the motivation is there, certainly from our elected members to deliver climate and biodiversity action, that resource and capacity. As well as that, I suppose, and across, we were very fortunate to be able to leverage funds from the Northwest Strategic Growth Partnership to deliver the Northwest Regional Energy Strategy and the Climate Action Framework. But now, obviously, we have to look towards a sustainable model of funding and continue to deliver cross-border initiatives in the Northwest. And as the Minister outlined there, there's a lot of work that needs to be done around the agri-food sector. We're continuing to do that, but again, that all comes down to funding and it comes down to capacity. And I suppose just to say, as I said before, the appetite is there, the will is there. We certainly want to continue to work on a cross-border basis for climate and biodiversity. And I suppose we just need the resources to deliver on that now going forward.
Yeah, and a question's been raised, and in some ways, you know, there are sensitivities clearly in some of the sort of the political views in Northern Ireland about shared island working, but particularly these instances be particularly sensitive in terms of the economic spheres. So I'm wondering, maybe as a question to you, Minister, whether you think, you know, the biodiversity and climate offers a maybe less sensitive area, and while, you know, the best approach is that those are embedded and mainstreamed within other policy sectors, as one of the Yvonne Buckley has asked a question on this, or whether resources dedicated to just climate and biodiversity is a quicker and in some ways a better way to make progress, rather than looking at, you know, embedding those, which might ultimately create a more effective approach, but actually by slightly separating them, it gives an opportunity to progress, you know, outside some of those controversies.
Yeah, maybe with Will in this way. I mean, one of the problems with, so many problems with Brexit, but one of the problems with the final agreement, the trade agreement, the agreement between the EU and the UK government, is that it was a trade agreement. It's very trade, or, you know, trade negotiators came up with the trade agreement orientated. It didn't really look at environment or climate or that much at all. And in some ways that gives you an opportunity because it's not in the text, if you know what I mean. You have more freedom to kind of, it's not going to get caught in political identity issues because it's not there. And in some ways that gives us a slight blank canvas to work with. And I've seen in the past, like, we were able to get real progress on all island electricity markets and so on. And one of the reasons, it's my former time as Minister for Energy back 10 years ago, and one of the reasons we were able to do it is because to a certain extent it wasn't in any of the St. Andrews agreements or other agreements. It was kind of, you could do beneath the radar a little bit. And so maybe climate and biodiversity is similar. It's the fact that it was slightly forgotten about in the political agreement maybe gives us room to fill the vacuum, or not to place it in that identity politics way.
Yeah. Okay, and we've got just a few minutes left of this panel. I'm wondering if the other panelists that haven't, you know, joined in the conversation wants to add anything. Marcia, Aoife, or Uno, is there anything you'd want to say before we finish up?
Maybe just a quick note. I think you know, all the contributions highlighted that there is obviously like more support needed in terms of resources and funding, and that probably biodiversity wasn't really as a topic like as much in the front line as climate change was. There's also obviously the tendency of separating the two crises, even if they are very much interlinked. In terms of the education, I've seen that there was a question there about existing initiatives. Now, I'm not aware at the minute of kind of educational initiatives that are north-south already, but for example, Antarctica participates at an international level with their education unit. And then the work of UNESCO is also very important in the Republic with the environment, with regards to environmental education for children and the youth. And a nice example in Northern Ireland that I really like, and probably there are some examples in the Republic as well, are forest schools. I think it's a very new approach to education for, you know, children a very young age. And it will be interesting probably to see some sort of initiatives as well to have a cooperation throughout the island. So I think working with the existing initiatives is already good. It's a very good way to speed up the process of cooperation. So thank you.
And Aoife, did you want to say something? If we're running out of time, so if you could make it quite brief.
I will be very quick. I just thought it was very interesting what the minister said there, that what's not in the text provides an opportunity. And I think we're agreed that we need to see level playing field and standards across the country, which will just allow us to improve. It takes the risk out of that risk of divergence out of the policy-making area, and allows us to improve the environment in both jurisdictions. But I guess the question is, how do we do this? How do we get to that situation where we're agreeing shared standards? And then that leads on to my next point, which is highlighted in the report, and I was really happy to see it, is that even though we do have these like existing structures given to us by the Good Friday Agreement, it's very difficult for civil society to engage with those structures as they are sort of highly diplomatic in their nature. And I was very taken with the suggestion in the report that there needs to be some kind of a structure built into these North-South institutions that allows civil societies, groups and communities to engage with that discussion and policy making that hopefully will be happening in the future. Thanks.
Okay, Una, did you not to be left out? Very quickly,
tiny
sure.
point. I just want to say that the All Ireland Pollinator Plan has been operating at ground level. And I just want to make the point again that we're seeing so much enthusiasm, so much interest, so much willingness to engage. And I think the possibilities are absolutely enormous if the structures can be put in place to allow it to happen.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks to all the panelists. I mean, really giving a flavour of the existing collaborations, already happening. And thank you, Virginie, for giving a role, particularly. Thank you very much, Minister Ryan, for joining us and giving some comment as well. So we'll move on to the next panel. And while that one was all about the existing collaborations, the next panel will give a bit of insight into some of the opportunities and the challenges for collaboration. And our first speaker here is Professor Michael Morris, who's the director of the Amber Research Centre and the School of Chemistry in Trinity College, Dublin. And Michael, you wanted to talk a little bit about the circular economy research that you're doing in Trinity.
Hello, so thank you very much for the invitation and the chance to speak about something. So I represent a group of scientists north and south of the border, principally in Queens, in fact, and also NGOs and government workers who are really trying to promote the circular economy across the island. I should fundamentally say one of the nice things about the report is that it frames a step change in the way that we're thinking about the circular economy. So too often in the past, we've thought about the circular economy as a chance to do superior waste management. And actually, that's nothing to do with the circular economy. It's an important step in terms of sustainability, how we treat waste, how we look after waste, and how we recycle waste back into useful resources. But the circular economy is much more than this. And I think the key word that people often miss out, because of recycling and the concept of reduce, reuse, recycle, is that it's an economic shift. And the economic shift is absolutely critical, because the reason we have the environmental and climate problems that we have today is because of economic activity, dating right back to the start of the Industrial Revolution in the 1770s. And that's been framed around mass consumerism, mass production, and the kind of philosophy of pile them high, sell them cheap. And we just take resources out of the planet, we make them into things, and we throw them away. And the circular economy is really about the disconnection of our economy. So it's really about economic growth, but which decouples us from resource extraction and resource use, and also waste production. So, better word for the circular economy is actually a zero waste economy, I think, which is more descriptive of what we want to do. But the challenges, the opportunities are fantastic. We know that manufacturing and transport associated with manufacturing is about 50% of all emissions across the globe. So changing the way we do our economy, the way we make things, we use things, is absolutely critical. But the challenge is that this is absolutely fundamental change. And if you just think about, the way we're sold things, we change our phones every month, we change our computers twice a year, we change our cars every 5 to 6 years. And we're just being sold things in a way which is totally disconnected with the damage that those things do. So how we transition from an economy that is geared in essence to cause damage and be non-sustainable to an economy which is absolutely focused on how we do things in a more sustainable way is absolutely pivotal to how we're going to actually enter the 21st century in a meaningful way. So we're very lucky in our group is being funded by the IRC for the next 6 months to kind of really cement it and change the way we do things. It's very much looking at technical solutions. So, you know, recycling is a fact of life. How do we do that better? How do we get more resources back? But all the way through to how do we help companies change? You know, if the economic model's changing, then business models have to change. So it's all about legislation. It's about social engagement. So we've been decoupled from taking responsibility from waste and extraction. So how do we engage the public and businesses to really grasp that tool? And so, and just very quickly, the change is so abrupt. It's like someone sitting there in the 1760s in a cottage industry saying, in 50 years' time, at the end of your working life, you'll be in a big factory in Manchester.
Yeah, great. Thanks. That very evocative. That's some very useful points that I'm sure we'll come back to. But you did also highlight, you know, the opportunities that come from that. And so, if I could move on to the next speaker. So Michael Darcy, he's the program lead for IBEC and CBI Joint Business Council, who made the submission for the report. I wanted to talk about some of the opportunities from a business perspective in this sector. So Michael, do you want to say things for a few minutes?
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you to you and NESC for this opportunity. So Jean has done a super job in summarizing what needs to be done. So what can I add in my 3 minutes? Well, first, and I think this just needs to be said, the fundamental opportunity is that everything she's recommended and we are discussing helps to embed peace and sustain prosperity underpinned by the Good Friday Agreement. That's just the core. I know everyone presumes it, but it's not often said enough in my view. So second, in terms of building on that, the Minister mentioned a moment ago the Northern Ireland Protocol, and while not disagreeing with them on the benefit of blank canvas, it does include the opportunity set out in Article 11, which includes commitment to maintain the conditions for North-South cooperation, and the first on the list is the environment. And that's built on the UK-EU mapping exercise on North-South cooperation, where a number of the schemes mentioned today are listed. And the NSMC is a consultation body with a seat on the specialised committee. And again, in all the debate on the protocol, we have not had a focus on that. Second, the Minister mentioned the Good Friday Agreement, and I'm sure he was referring to the annex, because everyone talks about the annex and North-South cooperation, but everyone forget it also says, and implementation. That word is too often forgotten, and perhaps that's the potential the Minister was referring to. So in terms of the shared island being a catalyst, it's always a catalyst. What works in the north and works in the south won't work for the island. You have to do new thinking to come up with a shared solution. So always a north-south cooperation is complex, challenging and difficult, but if the result is better for both jurisdictions, that's the benefit of working north-south. And again, that's something that I think is fundamental to these conversations and the benefit of what NESC is doing. Thirdly, in terms of what the IBEC-CBI Joint Business Council recommended in our submission, the 3 priorities were: 1, water management. We all need safe and sufficient supply of water. We've heard reference to the cross-border bodies that are doing a great job, the Lochs Agency, the Waterways Ireland, but there's a huge gap between their degree of joined up cross-border implementation and what's happening in the rest of the treated and wastewater arena. For both jurisdictions to meet their target, that gap has to be closed. It's just they won't meet them without it. Second, all island waste networks. I recall the Good Friday Agreement Belfast Good Friday Agreement included references to waste management as a formal area for North-South cooperation in the environment because of the scale of illegal waste disposal. Again, it's not often mentioned in these conversations, but there's no point in turning your eye on what might happen and undermine all the efforts of goodwill and good effort. So that risk of returning remains. As a result, the submission highlighted that currently both jurisdictions have separate and not joined up plans. Therefore, there's an urgent requirement for deeper, more joined up approach, including to protect the benefits of what the Good Friday Agreement has delivered in removing that risk and marginalising it for business and society actually in both jurisdictions. In terms of fundamental is joined up planning, not just of regulatory systems, but also getting around a table as mentioned in the working group. Finally, by far the biggest opportunity, and I would argue imperative, is energy, as the Minister mentioned. It is the engine of climate action. I would also argue that by far the greatest success in North collaboration is the single electricity market. It has kept the lights on, and there's 60,000 households today who are reminded what happens when the lights are not on. And it has sustained record economic growth in both jurisdictions. EirGrid and Sony have recently published a plan to achieve self-sufficiency in energy based on renewable energy by 2030, and to have an exporting surplus that brings additional revenue to both jurisdictions. The private sector investment is there. The single electricity market is a proven, solid, collaborative platform to build on, and the mutual benefit is surely too great to be achieved. So I would finish by saying NESC have highlighted the importance of getting into making it happen mode. It's mentioned working groups. I would say by far the biggest priority is to have a working group in this energy area. The Minister rightly has mentioned transition to EV, integrating hydrogen. There's huge opportunity on the business side, as well as on the actual consumption side. And finally, again, creating joined up community generating capacity, especially in the border regions, because as COVID has proved, look, would we build 2 generating plants on 2 sides of the border in Donegal and Derry? Neither plants will be optimal. The communities will suffer, business will suffer, the local economy will suffer. It's got to be one plant, it's got to be joined up, it's got to serve everybody equally. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And you packed a huge number of issues in there that maybe we can get some time to come back to discuss. So let's move on to the next speaker, Dylan Murphy, who's an activist and a part-time student at DCU again, who was another person that made a submission to the consultation. And Dylan, you want to talk a little bit about climate adaptation and renewable energy. So if you could do that for a couple of minutes, I'd be appreciative.
Yeah, no problem. And thanks so much to everyone that's attending here today. And thanks to NESC, and also thanks to my lecturer, Dermot Turney, who encouraged us through his innovative module to actually put in submissions to NESC. And I think one of the benefits of this being remote today is that I don't have to stand in front of about 120 people. But the other reason, I guess, that we're inside today is because of Storm Barra. And I think it's very apt that we're doing this during a storm, because as we know, these weather events are going to be becoming more intense due to climate change. And as Eamon Ryan mentioned, the Climate Advisory Council said that we aren't meeting the urgency when it comes to adaptation. And I guess that goes into what my 2 core points were in my submission to NESC. I was really glad to see those 2 points reflected in the final report. The first one focused on coastal erosion. And I actually live very close to Portrane. I'm in Donaghbate, just beside it. And there's some awful coastal erosion happening there. And I saw a video this morning about the effects of the storm and what I had there. And I think this is something that a lot of people in Ireland don't really realize to a large degree, is that we are facing the effects of climate change on our shores, and we are an island. And we need an all-island approach to coastal erosion. So it was great to see in that report that there was something there for a strategic working group when it comes to coastal management and coastal erosion. So it's great to see that. And also action point 33 that talked about all Ireland coastal erosion plan, which I think is really important. We need to be sharing our notes when it comes to that, and best approaches on how to adapt to the climate crisis. Another point is that, like COVID-19 has kind of shown us, the climate crisis doesn't care about arbitrary lines in the sand. The science is settled, and the science is the same in the north as it is in the south. And that's why I mentioned in my submission, and was reflected in the report, was onshore fracking. And onshore fracking is banned down in the south. The legislators heard the evidence, and they said that it wasn't appropriate for us to be doing it down south. And that evidence is exactly the same up north, but there's still debate about whether it should be allowed up north. So I was saying we have to have a shared and common policy when it comes to onshore fracking in Ireland, across the island. And as a core ask of the Youth Climate Association in Northern Ireland, who are campaigning on this, and that's very important to note, because in this report it was mentioned that there wasn't a lot of representation from the north. So it's important that we don't ignore the youth, because they are our future, and it's at our peril that we ignore the future of Ireland and the world. So thanks very much.
Great, thanks. Some very useful points there. So thanks very much for making those. And the report and a couple of other people have mentioned already, you know, the background on an all-island context of research and universities as well, which is clearly something close to my heart as well. But the next speaker will talk a little bit about this as well. So I can introduce Professor Tasman Crowe, who's the director of the Earth Institute at UCD and chair of the National Biodiversity Forum, in particular here in his role as a member of the All-Island Climate and Biodiversity Research Network. So Tasman, do you want to talk for a few minutes on that?
Thanks very much. Yes. So firstly, congratulations on an excellent and timely report. As a marine ecologist, I was reminded of Simon Coveney's quote about the fact that fish don't recognise sovereignty. And I was also glad to see particular emphasis on the need for transboundary cooperation in relation to marine and coastal environments. But my main focus here, though, is to talk about the All-Island Climate and Biodiversity Research Network. As everyone is increasingly aware, the challenges around climate change and biodiversity loss are extremely pressing and substantial, and the consequences of failing to address them and to address them well are severe. So each step that's taken to deal with one aspect of this wicked problem can potentially have repercussions, either good or bad, for others. So our future well-being and prosperity depend very much on taking the right actions in the right ways over the next few years. And these challenges can't be met by individual researchers acting alone, or by individual stakeholders or policymakers or practitioners. It needs a very high level of communication and collaboration among a very diverse range of individuals. And even if we just consider the research for a moment, we need a much better level of understanding between the natural and physical sciences, the engineering, arts, social sciences and humanities, because scientific or technological solutions simply won't work unless we understand how society may respond to them, how industry may take them up, and what the cultural impacts may be, and what form policy needs to take to be effective. So we really need to undertake interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research and combine relevant quantitative and qualitative information and make it readily available to inform decision making. And it's only by working through all of these aspects, right through the process, that we can expect to have the most worthwhile impacts of change. Of course, many relationships and collaborations do already exist, as we've already heard, particularly between individual researchers and stakeholders in Northern and Southern Ireland. And through, for example, research projects, seminars, and roles as external examiners or consultants. But what's been lacking is a more substantive and coordinated program of collaboration that fully leverages the breadth and depth of expertise in our respective institutions on the whole island. We're too closely connected. The island is too small, time is too short, and resources are too limited for us to work in a fragmented way. That's the situation that led to the genesis of the All-Island Climate and Biodiversity Research Network, to bring together researchers and stakeholders from the island of Ireland to develop a more strategic, streamlined and effective approach, more joined up thinking, if you will. It was initiated in December 2019 by a core group of representatives of some of the relevant institutions, North and South. And since then, it's been reaching out to establish a network encompassing as many relevant researchers and stakeholders as possible on the island of Ireland. So the challenge before us is to find the best way forward through the climate and biodiversity crises. And the opportunity presented by the Shared Island Initiative is for us to find that way together through initiatives like the All-Island Climate and Biodiversity Research Network. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tasman. We've got about 6 minutes for a very quick discussion. And one thing that's come in, which maybe is well, challenging for all of us, but actually hits on quite a lot of what this panel has gone, is there's a question from Paul Donnelly, who suggests there's an excellent point in terms of circular economy made by Michael Morris, but perhaps he sort of stimulates us, but we should be talking about degrowth as opposed to economic growth in terms of this. And clearly that has implications for employment, and clearly from the business interest that Michael Darcy suggested could be challenging. So I don't know, maybe Michael Morris, if you could start with you, and then anyone else who wants to say something about how, you know, the concept of degrowth fits in with what you're talking about, circular economy.
Yeah, just to give a flavour of that, you know, you've got to balance the fact that all the economic growth we've had has had tremendous benefits on society. and degrowth, we have to be very careful about what we're talking about. I think the circular economy is all about manufacturing degrowth, but looking at other parts of the economy that can grow to compensate that, particularly local. So local manufacturing, local solutions like repair, like disassembly, so that we actually, instead of having large companies that are driving sales, we have smaller companies that are driving repairs. And I think that's the critical issue. It's about maintaining our economy for the benefit of everyone, but also just making things in a completely different way, you know, through design, through pricing, through the, you know, reducing built-in obsolescence. You know, it's a thing that companies don't like to admit to. But that's a really important fact. You know, we have to, if we could just make everything we use last twice as long, we'd halve our carbon emissions from manufacturing. So I think it's about decoupling manufacturing growth from economic well-being, and that's the way that I would approach the answer to the question.
Okay, Michael Darcy, I don't know whether, you know, the groups that you're interested in and involved in have ever engaged in discussions over degrowth and whether they find that over challenging. So I don't know whether you have a view on that.
So we always be careful with language, and perhaps in North-South you learn about that better than in most other areas, okay? So actually what I'm hearing said is sort of re-engineering growth, if I may put it that way. But maybe I could make an overall economic point which encompasses both. I mean, the fundamental essence of the island economy is the economy of scale and proximity. So leaving the scale bit at the moment is actually multi-purpose. It can relate to the totality of someone in Cork finding an opportunity to work in Belfast, or it can look to the opportunity of someone in Newry supplying a good locally and fixing something in Dundalk, okay? So let's not lose sight of the basic economics here, which apply right across all of these activities. In terms of prosperity, well, you know, at the end of the day, I'm old enough to remember when Ireland wasn't a prosperous place in either jurisdiction. And before COVID, more people on this island were employed. They were working in jobs that they felt remunerated them, and both, particularly this state, has more resources than it ever had to deploy behind the re-engineering of the economy that you're talking about. So I just think we have to be careful how we approach this. There's a lot of, you know, I've listened to discussion about climate change. A lot of people envisage technology will play a key role. Technology needs to be developed. It needs investment. That investment, there's enormous funding available from the private sector. The European Commission is mobilizing in order to direct it towards the support of what the states and the European Union and the UK is happening the same, are setting out to achieve. So I just think we need to be just focused on things. And I keep coming back to the three areas I mentioned. At the end of the day, water, you know, the management, the circular economy is also about eliminating waste by reuse. To achieve reuse, you have to have technological solutions as well as having, you know, processes in place and investment, people willing to put the money into the pocket. It's their money on the line to build the plants for the supply in order to achieve that goal, right? So, and finally, the energy one, I keep coming back to that. I keep coming back to this goal of, you know, someone was writing the other way, we could be the Norway, this island could be the Norway of the 21st century. As the minister said, that it succeeds at every level in creating this new renewable energy paradigm. Okay, that to me is re-engineering the economy. It's not degrowth, it's re-engineering the economy to supply a fundamental need that we all have in our homes, in our lives, and in our workplaces.
Okay, thanks. And I mean, it does highlight the fact that, you know, climate change is as much about us rethinking the economy as an environmental thing, and maybe that is done better on an all-island basis. We don't have much time left, but I just wanted to give Tasman or Dylan an opportunity to maybe just say something else on what you've heard from the other speakers, either on the specific question we just had or anything else, and we'll close up then. So if you could be very brief, I don't know. Dylan, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I might just add to that discussion there that was had about degrowth and kind of circular economy. I think something that is interesting is kind of living within our kind of planetary boundaries. Like Kate Broward, I'm not sure if anyone's read her book, it's another circle to introduce, but donut economics, talking about the kind of planetary boundaries that we should exist within. I think that's something to consider. And also the point that we can possibly get to a point where we can decarbonize our energy systems and allow growth to continue in that sense. But the biodiversity crisis, it can't be decoupled that easily. So we need something like Michael Morris is talking about, of having a more circular economy, a zero waste economy in terms of repairing, and not building that need to kind of have over consumerism, which will lead to kind of that waste that we're seeing that is harming our environment.
Okay, Tasman, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of echo Una Fitzpatrick's kind of comments from the earlier discussion about the fundamental willingness of people to engage and try to improve things, including, researchers, community groups, NGOs, and businesses. There's a real commitment here and an enthusiasm. And I think the trick now is to put the structures in place to actually facilitate that. At the moment, it's actually quite challenging to establish cooperative ventures and get them supported. And so I think that would be a really big step forward to make that easier for everyone to do.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks to all that panel. We do have a question and answer session at the end. I'm hoping everybody involved in the panel can be around and maybe contribute to any discussion that comes up just at the end of the event as well. So let's move on to the third panel, and this has got 3 speakers, which really the focus is on actually looking at how these issues could be developed further. We've talked about the opportunities and the existing collaborations. We just want to now look at what can be done to forward things a little bit more. So the first panelist we have here is Dr. Ema Cotter, who's the Director of the Office of Evidence and Assessment for the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And Ema is going to outline some areas for development, drawing on their submission on how to strengthen existing collaborations. So Ema.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this launch and also to be part of this panel discussion on future developments. So we in the EPA, we see massive opportunities in terms of working on an all-island basis to address our climate and biodiversity challenges. This decade is going to be the decade of action, and we need to see collaboration happen right across this island, in addition to at an EU and an international level, if we're to advance and make progress and address our significant environmental challenges, including climate and biodiversity. I'm going to just talk to 3 points in terms of future developments and picking up some of the themes that have already been mentioned numerous times over the course of the morning. The first area that I'd highlight is the opportunity to work on an all-island basis in terms of developing appropriate mitigation solutions and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. The scale and the profile of our greenhouse gas emissions are similar, both north and south. And that means that those solutions that will work both north and south can be developed here. The knowledge, the experience, the on-the-ground work can actually translate into workable and implementable solutions. And again, we heard earlier this morning about how do we get on with actually delivering and implementing now. And really, in the agriculture sector, it is one area that I would highlight. It is responsible for the main contributor to our greenhouse gas emissions, both north and south. That sets us apart from other EU member states, for example. And so many of the solutions can come from this island to be implemented on this island in terms of addressing our agricultural emissions. And the Minister picked up that point, and Jean also mentioned a potential strategic working group. So I really would endorse that. The second area is around adaptation. We've had really good discussion already around the adaptation challenges. We are an island, we have a shared geography. It makes total sense that we do this on an all-island basis. We know from all of the research storms that we're sitting through at the moment will increase in terms of their intensity and their frequency. And so promoting and working across jurisdictions on climate adaptation planning is an area that warrants more focus. And I know there is already work happening in this space, but further focus, adaptation is often comes secondary to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, and it really needs to be on a par. And I know Jean again mentioned a strategic working group in that area, so it's good to see that that we're aligning on many of these things. And then the last area that I'd highlight is around environmental research. Again, many good points raised already through the course of the discussion this morning. Our environmental research programme in the EPA has always had a very strong all-island dimension, and we will continue in that vein. We've heard about from Tasman Crow about an all-island network again on climate change and biodiversity. It seems like a huge area that's ripe for even further strengthening and cooperation, to have people working across multiple institutions on shared challenges and developing solutions for this island. So to just call that out again as an area that we shouldn't lose sight of. It is there's a lot of existing work there, a lot of existing structures, but I think further strengthening collaboration could happen there. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, and happy to pick up anything in the discussion afterwards.
Great, thank you, Emma. That was very useful. Let's move on then to Dr. Jade Berman, who's the acting manager for Climate NI based at the Northern Ireland Environment Link, and works on transboundary adaptation learning exchange project as a climate resilience researcher. So Jade is going to talk a little bit about strengthening collaborations on climate action on the island. So Jade.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for having me here. It's been very interesting hearing the views that have been put forward so far. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about sort of the role of Climate NI as sort of this intersectoral network, and some of the work we're already doing on a transboundary basis as well, and how that can lead to future and better collaborations as such. So collaboration is vital, and as has been brought up previously by speakers, capacity is vital as well in order to be able to do that and do it well. We do have an intersectoral network here, which covers cross-sectoral. So that means it covers both national, local government, lots of the sort of business and NGO umbrella organisations, and brings them together to share that best practice around adaptation. And we connect in through the TALEX project, which is the Transboundary Adaptation Learning Exchange project, which is funded by EPA. Thank you very much. And it's actually been brilliant. It's found a gap because it brings together across both the UK and across the island of Ireland. It's brought lots of people together to share that good practice. And we've looked at both the learning exchange, so bringing people together. We're looking at building a capacity and maturity model by co-developing this with stakeholders, and we'd really like that opportunity to test it and use it, because it's no point having research and things sitting on the shelf if they aren't taken to that implementation level and used and applied. And certainly the feedback we've been getting and building that there was a gap for this, and that it's been really good both for the South, for us, and also across the water as well, to sort of help people connect and share their learning and experience. Also, in terms of sort of local government, we have the Local Government Climate Action Network, which Kathy mentioned earlier, which has been really useful. With the absence of legislation here, local government have taken it upon themselves to push forward with adaptation and build on that as well, which has been good, and they're supporting each other. And so that connection, starting to see those cross-boundary projects develop, is really good, and an area to sort of be supported in the future. And also, data was mentioned there, and research, and there's often this gap that research is often UK but really GB based, or it's kind of the South without. And so actually connecting that together, because working recently on the UK climate risk assessment, we really did begin to see how there was this just gap, this sort of absence in a lot of areas for Northern Ireland data, where perhaps things don't join up as well, and they will do, and we should do more on an all island basis, and as well across all of the islands in this area. So they're kind of the areas I wanted to focus on, was kind of creating that capacity, making sure the data matches up, and also networks, because networks are the glue that bring people together and they help things happen in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. And then let's quickly move on to the final speaker of the day before we have other questions, which is Shane Campbell. And Shane is the Chief Executive of the Irish Central Border Area Network, ICMAN. Who is going to make a few points on how they view existing collaboration, how to strengthen it. So Shane, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Ellis, and good morning, everybody. Thank you to NESC for asking us to participate. As a cross-border partnership, we very much welcome this collaboration report and the initiative that it can help create. There's just 3 points I'd like to make. Firstly, to address such new challenges requires really new mindsets. So if we are to be successful as an island in meeting these challenges, we must think beyond borders and obstacles. In a recent informal network meeting that we had, one of our partners rightfully said that landscapes need to be the focus, really thinking around landscapes of collaboration effectively. We're mindful as a cross-border group that cross-border cooperation has taken on a new symbolic and practical significance in this new geopolitical environment. As an island, we have to think in terms of mutual benefit rather than competition and divergence. In our Centre Border region, our latest initiative on behalf of the 8 local authority members is the framework of regional priorities, and that initiative is built around the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. It highlights our shared rural environment as a strength and an asset, and one of the key pillars for development in that is titled Natural Capital and Greening Our Region. And secondly, by extension, we must embrace joined-up thinking to take advantage of island-wide synergies. For example, funding programs for watercourse improvements don't easily provide support for cross-border elements. National funding programs cease at the border of a jurisdiction, we know. And so having cross-border project elements can render applications as, let's say, problematic, or for opportunities for what can be good, mutually beneficial projects to both north and south can be lost unless departments and agencies adopt their approaches. My final point is governments must be serious about connecting with communities, with farmers and with other stakeholders to realise this just transition. It's about enabling people to take action. After all, they have the knowledge, the local knowledge, and they can provide the impetus and the drive. Our region's primary assets, including its landscape, countryside, and waterways, underpin the agriculture and tourism sectors, and their sustained growth is integral to our economic development. These are essentially rural assets, and so their conservation and sustainable development will help our rural economy to diversify. And we very much appreciate support from the DFA's Reconciliation Fund for one such new project, which can help trial transition in rural areas. The title of this is Border Transition. It's an intergenerational project that will bring together rural communities from both traditions and other traditions on both sides of the border to engage in a unique approach to peace building through community-led climate action. These community clusters will be supported to engage on the various common water quality, biodiversity, and community and education issues they have, and to then develop agreed solutions. The areas of Upper Loch McNean and Lower Loch McNean, which are in the cross-border area between Fermanagh, Cavan and Leitrim, has been identified as our testing ground for this approach, and hopefully their examples and learning can be replicated elsewhere across the border region. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Shane. And again, we have a few minutes to just talk amongst the panelists. So, I mean, you've all highlighted some really useful areas that things could be developed. I'm wondering if the three of you could think of just one out of all the activities you've talked about which need to be developed, what would be the one most important thing that you think we should do in the area of climate and biodiversity, or climate or biodiversity? And if so, what is the one thing that needs to be sort of unlocked or moved to get that to work? So I don't know if that's clear enough or not. It might be something you might want to elaborate, something you've said already. So one thing that would make that work or push it forward. So I'll go back to Emma maybe to start off with.
Yeah, like it's always really hard to pick one thing. So I mean, I would to just emphasize then the opportunities within the agriculture sector. I think there is a huge opportunity here to share learning and knowledge across both north and south in looking at the agriculture sector in particular. I mean, quite a lot, over the years, I've heard about collaboration and knowledge sharing between Ireland, the south, and New Zealand, because they have a similar agriculture sector, and yet it's like literally just up the road we have a open and willing partner in terms of understanding this sector more in terms of what will work. It's a difficult sector to achieve emission reductions and needs to be done in a way that works for the farming community, a hugely important sector economically. So there is, it's a complex area, and the whole thing is rife really for further collaboration and knowledge sharing and developing, as I say, workable solutions. developed by Irish and the farming industry with researchers, and that can be implemented in Ireland. So that's what I would emphasize.
Okay, thanks for that. Jade?
Oh, okay. Well, I guess if I'm picking one thing, I'm going to go broad and then narrow. So I'm going to say, which is cheating really. I'm going to say, so adaptation generally tends to be the Cinderella side, as has been mentioned before, and that goes cross-sectorally from agriculture, where there are some wins there of working with something that is slightly less controversial and looking to see how we can make the agriculture and food sector more resilient, more locally resilient. And then also I'm just going to add on, because this is my personal focus, would be sort of the marine side of things and having those connections both towards the adaptation side and building that cross-border area in terms of sharing between different organizations that work in those areas as well, to have that proper all island focus.
Okay, Shane?
Garrett, it's an extension of the point you make with regards to funding. We've got Peace Plus, we've had Interact funds that have supported cross-border opportunities in environment, economy, tourism, etc. But beyond Peace Plus, we won't have on this island a joint territorial funding programme. And we need to plan for that, we need to think about that. So if we are to resource the ambitions that we talk about, the opportunities here, we must finance it. Could that be that we would see an opportunity to take shared island funds with the UK's shared prosperity funds, which are supposed to be for regional development, and to find in some ways where we can bring those together to create that space? Because if we don't do it, well, we aren't really addressing the issues of reducing emissions and protecting nature unless we really do it together north-south.
Okay, thanks for that. And so we're just coming to the end of the panel. So again, as suggested in the chat, we'll have a much broader question and answer session. So if anyone wants to type any questions on there, including any of the panelists as well, if they wanted to ask a question of anyone else, and we'll draw to a vote. And just finally then, a very, very quick question. Out of the things that you've said, these panelists, Jade, Shane and Emma, who's the one organization or the one person that maybe needs to be brought a little bit more into the conversation to push this forward? Emma?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's if I stay with the agriculture theme, then I mean, bringing the farming associations, both north and south, into this discussion will be important in terms of tackling greenhouse gas emissions in the sector, and I say that because they are trusted by the farming community. They have a deep reach into the farming community, and bringing them into this, understanding what the issues are, and we won't agree on everything, that's absolutely clear, but having that dialogue perhaps would be one way of making that bridge into a community that we need to get on board here, and that are actively in some pockets trying to do that.
Shane or Jade, do you want to say one last thing about?
Yeah, so in terms of bringing in, there was that mentioned before about the lack of Northern Ireland participation in this, and I know Janine reached out very well, but it could also be to do with the feeling of ownership. So we've been looking at that co-development, that co-creation, and if it looks like it has an Irish wrapper, that can be a little bit more difficult in bringing people in from the north, in terms of feeling like they own it, feeling like they're really part of it, and feeling like they can contribute. And that goes from sort of government minister level to right the way cascading down between the networks.
Finally, Shane?
Yeah, it's very similar to what Jade said, is to endorse that from a Northern Ireland perspective. We're a cross-border group, we work with all political parties, both sides of the community. It's the unionist community. The unionist community needs to be involved in these conversations and discussions. And as the Minister said, climate change and biodiversity protection are safe areas for collaboration and cooperation. And I think if there's greater outreach to that community through a forum like this, and this is a good starting point, I think then yes, we can realise that.
Great. Thank you very much to the three of you, and to all the panelists we've had so far. Hopefully you might be able to contribute to some of the more general questions and answers we're moving into now. So Again, we can take any general questions, and I'd be interested in any of the panelists maybe wanting to contribute to this. And just as to start off with, then maybe I can go back to one of our earliest, in fact, our first panelist, Una Fitzpatrick, who talked about the pollinator plan, which seems to be a very sort of almost structured way of going about it. I'm wondering if you could reflect a little bit about how we can build on what works very well with that in terms of other initiatives or anything you want to hear from what you've heard already.
Thanks, Grant. Yeah, it's a good question. And I think as I tried to outline before, with the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, we involved both jurisdictions right from the very start. So both fed in initially. So we wanted to create that, as other speakers have also highlighted, that shared sense of something that we were doing together. So I think that's been really important. As I said before, it's all very well in any sort of biodiversity initiative of asking people to get involved on the ground unless you tell them what it is that you want them to do. So that's what we've done within the Pollinator Plan, is create these evidence-based guidelines. And a really important part of that was making sure that those guidelines worked equally well, either in both jurisdictions. So that means engaging with people in the south and in the north to make sure that they make sense, that they're written in the right way, that the language is correct for everyone. And I think it's those kind of structures that you need. It's within the All Ireland Pollinator Plans, we've been really transparent about what we're doing and the progress that we're making. So there's a lot of annual report, and you can see what everyone who's involved in it is doing. It's a voluntary plan, but people have been incredible about just buying into it and actually getting involved. And that annual reporting, so that you don't feel you're the only sector, or you're the only individual. It's only people in the south, it's only people in the north that are participating. So you can see what everyone's doing, and everyone can learn from what's happening. So I think it's having that constructive, inclusive, positive structure to start. And then, to be honest, we're continually amazed at the support that something like the Pollinator Plan has got. And I think it just shows that if you do have that, the potential to make real change on the ground is huge.
Thanks for that. And maybe we've heard a little bit about the role of local authorities. And I saw in the comments a comment from Andy Pollock, and I remember maybe it was 20 years ago when Andy was at the Centre for Cross-Border Studies. He actually funded a study that myself and other colleagues did on local authorities' involvement in sustainable development under local Agenda 21. That was a very long time ago. And it was that local authorities did provide a space that maybe wasn't so much under the spotlight, or had a few more opportunities for collaboration. And I think in this context they have as well. So I'm wondering whether both Shane and Kathy could maybe talk a little bit more about on the climate and the biodiversity, about what local authorities could be doing more, or what they need to do even more work on this, and how we can share those lessons more widely. So should we go to Kathy first?
Yep, thank you, Grant. Yeah, I suppose as I outlined before, and as Jade outlined as well, local authorities, specifically in the north, are flying ahead, as it were, with climate action in the absence of local legislation, mainly because we see the benefits of it. It's we have an ethical imperative to do these things, but we also see the economic benefits, the benefits to our own ratepayers and our citizens. And I think because we're very much at the front line in terms of response, if you like, from severe weather events, and delivering those frontline services on a daily basis, it really does. The onus is really very much on local authorities to act. And I suppose in that vein, it's also about working collaboratively, as Jade also outlined. We need to work much more collaboratively, and we are starting to do that in Northern Ireland between councils. But what we need, as I mentioned before, is much more resources and capacity to deliver that. Very few councils in Northern Ireland, for instance, have climate officers. It's often an add-on to roles, and I think for us in councils as well, there is that data gap. So we're embarking on a greenhouse gas baseline study at the moment, and looking at our carbon budgeting and our roadmap to net zero. But what we need is much more robust climate data that is correlated with national inventories, for instance. So there's a real joined up approach needed to data and information that really will equip local authorities to continue to deliver what they want to do on the ground, and then working collaboratively. there's ourselves, obviously, as I mentioned, working with Donegal County Council, but I know that Newry and Mourne are now working very closely with Louth as well, and Fermanagh and Omagh have released their climate action strategy. Councils are doing a lot. What I would suggest is that they need to be also sitting around the table when higher level policies are being decided upon. They need to be much more involved at a government level in terms of informing policies and decisions, because often it's on the ground that have to and directly with communities.
Thanks for that. And Shane?
Geraint, I spoke of our latest strategic initiative, the framework of regional priorities. That's been driven by the 8 local authorities of our partnership, which is Donegal as well as in our partnership, Sligo, Leitrim, Cavan, Monaghan, Fermanagh and Omagh, Mid-Ulster and Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon for our councils. It's a different strategy and a different approach to what we would normally have had before. I think in this one, we very much recognise the rurality of our area and the assets and the strengths that we have in that huge region that we call the Central Border area. It's an approach that we've taken that is built on the Sustainable Development Goals as the planning framework and the basis of it. And it's looking at, well, the local authorities in common have that remit for economic development, but economic development, as we know it, has been very much changed and is now very much weighted into sustainable development principles, where you have those interrelationships between societal well-being and business fortunes and the quality of your environment. And that approach that we've taken is very much fitted towards the needs to the issues of the Central Border region, and is driven by the 8 local authorities, and therefore shows the approach that they're taking anew to developing that area, that common area for the future.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And we've also got two questions. One question directly on the structures for the Good Friday Agreement from Susie, but also an interesting perspective from Katrina that suggests that in some ways ecological breakdown is a conflict, and as a result of that. And so, you know, out of the peace process, you know, there were hard-won lessons of peacemaking, resilience, and so on, and the Good Friday Agreement came out of that. So I'm wondering if I could ask maybe Aoife and Sean about sort of the Good Friday Agreement and any lessons from sort of the peace building through that on how we can focus on this. So it could be an institutional thing in terms of using the Good Friday Agreement institutions, or more broadly about sort of dialogue and so on. That's the lessons that were won from there. So Aoife, I don't know if you got the sense of the question from that, and if you wanted to say something.
No, thanks. I think I got a sense of the question from the chat, the Q&A function there. I suppose what we were keen to highlight is that although the Good Friday Agreement bodies provide these forums for North-South and indeed East-West policy making and hopefully implementation, they are extremely diplomatic in how they do their business. And this means that there is space for policy making where citizens and civil society find it difficult to engage. We can, especially collectively. So if ourselves and IEN and Neil wish to do advocacy on a sort of collectively on a North-South basis, there's no specific forum currently where we can do that. We can work in our respective governments or local authorities, but there's no North-South forum where we can actually do that in practice. So what we would be looking for is that those institutions, in particular the North-South Ministerial Council, where much of the policy making might take place, is that there are formal opportunities to engage with the work of these bodies, that there is sort of increased transparency on their work plans and on their discussions, that, for example, such as we do with national parliaments and local councils, that there's facilitation of submissions and consultations, and that these are open to individuals as well as civil society groups. I don't know, Sean, if you want to add anything to that, but we do believe that, you know, without that sort of openness to consultation and transparency, that it makes it very difficult then to improve things on an all-island basis.
If I could just add on to what Aoife said. Yeah, I think our report was very interesting because, and Aoife's already referred to some of the structures within the Good Friday Agreement, and namely the North-South Ministerial Council, which has done a lot of good high-level stuff, but it's quite impenetrable, really, I think, for ENGOs really to get much access to it or get our voice across. But also within the Good Friday Agreement, there were a number of other bodies and strands set up as well, many of which have environmental aspects or have the capacity to deal with environmental issues, which have been developed to a greater or less extent, in some cases not at all. And I'm thinking there, for example, there was also reference to the British-Irish Council as well, which is basically Ireland and basically UK, England, Scotland, Wales, Isle of Man, Channel Isles, etc. as well. And it has an environmental remit as well as a number of other remits. And the reason why I mention that is because it's something I think it's important from the Northern Ireland aspect to get round the bigger political points, if you wish, is we do have to look north, south, east, west, and how we do things and how we engage. But that's okay, because that's a key part of the Good Friday Agreement. And those Good Friday Agreement structures are there. As I said, like North-South Ministerial Council and the British-Irish Council as well. There's also the British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference as well, which doesn't have a particular, sorry for all these acronyms and names, but it doesn't have a particular environmental remit, but it is within the power and gift of that body to do so, because it's basically chaired, I think, by the Secretary of State and the Irish Minister for Foreign Affairs. So that's something. So there are structures that could be there that could be maximized, and there's other ones that do exist that haven't really been developed the way we would like to do. There also was a possibility within the Good Friday Agreement as well for an all-island consultative forum. Now, once again, when we look at all these issues, particularly biodiversity and climate change and the crisis and the fact that we have to address these across these islands, and to use that phrase in their totality, well, that's great. Well, it's not quite that simple, but we have the political structures. We don't have to go about rewriting any other particular agreements. Reference was made earlier on to the protocol, I think, to Article 11, and the fact that how there can be cooperation in areas, including the environment, north and south. So the architecture is there, but where's the will and the ability to derive it? That's what we need to get to.
I mean, in the context of the various institutions that you talked about, Andy Pollock has just posted quite an interesting question, which I wonder if any of the panelists would like to talk about. So while there are a lot of different institutions there, Andy suggested that there's, Tom Arnold has suggested actually the creation of a new north-south body to add to the 7 that's existing, just to focus on climate change and biodiversity. So I'm wondering if there's any panelists that feel strongly about that in favor or against, or offer an alternative. Does anyone want to take that up?
If I can start with that one, at the risk of, I don't mind in terms of, I think anything that can be constructed that could be useful, that doesn't duplicate, that doesn't, cross over. It's effective if we can get a structure that people agree, north and south. I mean, to me, there's been a bit of movement in this over the years. If you look at consultations, just for example, if you look at consultations going back a number of years ago, say on the biodiversity issue or a climate change issue, whatever it was, particularly I think within Northern Ireland, and I can't speak so much for the Republic of Ireland, say we're dealing with biodiversity, it's biodiversity in Northern Ireland. Now, in this last so many years, we've seen maybe a section within biodiversity or our new environment strategy where it'll refer to the fact that how we have to work with our near neighbours and work on an all-island basis, etc. And that'll be a small section on that. And that's to be applauded. We've made that development, but there's reference earlier on, I think Jean and others made, into the fact of whether we can have a joint or an all-island biodiversity or climate strategy. If we can get to that point, and if the government departments and bodies can align to get us to the point where we can try to work at how we can tackle these issues purposefully in a much more integrated way across the sectors, north, south, I think that's really where I would like us to be, because it's based on the idea of mutual cooperation. It's not the bigger political constitutional issues, it's mutual cooperation. Now, if that requires a new body, and if that's what the decision is, great. you know, and it's adequately resourced and it really needs to get into the issues, super. But, you know, it's I would look at what we have first of all, and if that can be advanced and developed further, why not? But that's just my personal opinion.
Okay, thanks. Don't know if anyone else wants to come in that, otherwise I'll go off to yeah.
Can I come in there? Just a couple
Yep.
of things. First, obviously, on the agreement itself, I understand everyone says, and indeed there's the possibility to create additional, you know, others to be considered is the final line, as you know, in the annex, okay? But don't forget that requires legislation to be passed jointly by the British and Irish parliaments. So there's an important point there. And that brings me back to something that sometimes when we get into the discussion about shared body, one, I agree, what climate action covers everything. If you went down the list of existing North-South cooperation, there's probably not one cross-border body that have executive responsibilities that isn't impacted by the requirement to support climate action. So I think that's the first point. The second point is where I see right now, the real blockage is in actually the respective jurisdictions. For example, while Science Foundation Ireland has a mandate to fund all island research, I note that the Climate Action Advisory Council seems to have no all-island remit. I understand EPA are doing cross-border work, but I'm not exactly sure. Maybe you can clarify precisely in the legislation the degree to which that can be. So I think within both jurisdictions, there's a job of work to be done first to figure out where does the existing legislative mandates for agencies that play a key role in this to support shared island work. Secondly, business is not constrained in the same way as government is. Business investment can move seamlessly across the border and is. Businesses are working to an all-island model. I think everyone on this call should understand that you can address business in an all-island manner, and the protocol protects that and supports it. And I think that's a fundamental thing. And that means the investment piece, the re-engineering bit I mentioned earlier, and the operational piece. And that's business north and south. You mentioned about farmers, there's agri-food companies, and farmers we have an all-island agri-food model into which agri-food and production is entirely joined up. That's the key word, and is a serious, significant asset for the island. You mentioned Tom Arnold. He's produced a 2030 strategy. In that, he's talked about the fundamentals of soil and the fundamental capacity that on our island we get our soil quality right. We find out what it is, what the challenges are. And again, that's another key building block for biodiversity. So again, there's a lot more flexibility and movement here if you follow the channels that are moving. Okay, and you go with them and you work around the barriers that are in place instead of constantly knocking your heads against them, as some of us have been doing for 30 years and maybe are finally learning the lessons.
Okay, I mean the whole issue, the whole debate opens up so many different perspectives, as we can see from, you know, all the issues that we're talking about. And just to narrow it down to, we haven't got that much time, just to maybe two last issues. One that has been mentioned quite a bit is marine and coastal protection and adaptation, that's been mentioned by quite a few speakers. So I was going to maybe prompt Tasman to maybe say about what you thought, how that particular issue in an all-island context could be progressed.
Yeah, actually, I don't have much expertise in marine coastal protection as such. As more the biodiversity side would be my my side of things, which I can talk to a little bit instead, maybe. But and certainly that is very clearly requiring of a sort of all-island perspective in terms of, for example, protected areas and identifying species and habitats and processes and other cultural features that need to be preserved. You know, that there is a fundamental linkage between the marine systems in the north and south, a fundamental need for that to be streamlined. So, and there are some really good initiatives that are already seeking that kind of cooperation there. So there's a MARPAM project, for example, that's funded on the Interreg program, that's bringing together north and south perspectives to kind of come up with a shared vision of how marine protected areas should be managed and should engage stakeholders and so on. So I think there is real possibilities there. I saw that Jade put a hand up, maybe is better able to comment on the coastal protection side of things.
Jade, did you want to say anything?
If I may, because my background is that and sort of looking at that side of things. I guess there's sort of a lot of areas where it can be joined up. Obviously, there's a shared body such as the Lochs Agency already, but there is, you know, just to sort of look at that sort of coastal erosion side, there's good work going on at the moment up in Northern Ireland in terms of mapping and looking at where erosion's happening using LiDAR surveys. And it is so important that, of course, you know, our coast doesn't know where these sort of invisible and sort of slightly unagreed boundaries are in between the two sides when you sort of like look through the loch. So it's about kind of making sure that's joined up and making sure that, you know, the species that move around, the currents that flow, they're all connected. And so we do need to join that all up, both in terms of the coastal side and also the marine side around the island of Ireland and beyond as well, because they do connect up that way too.
Okay, thanks for that. And finally, maybe something that's been said as well, we'll just get a few comments on this, is the idea of, Brian O'Gallagher raises some questions about funding for research, and clearly, you know, research isn't the only basis of this, but clearly the report that Jean's done offers a very important sort of catalyst in a lot of these discussions. So I don't know whether, for example, Emma or Michael Morris would like to say something about, you know, the platform for research and particularly availability of funding for all island initiatives and how that could work. Any ideas of how that could be pushed forward, any opportunities there? Michael, did you want to say something, and then maybe I'll come to Emma?
Yeah, I think Brian raised a good point in that, are we ready as a shared island to actually fund the research? We heard Michael talk about the opportunities for businesses by evolving technical solutions, but this costs money. I mean, all of this, and huge amounts of money if we're going to be serious. Science Foundation Island currently can't fund researchers north of the border, as far as I'm aware, but I know it's a goal. So actually how we carry out joint research programs is very limited at the moment, and you know, is mediated about applying for EU grants, which are very low funding probability at the moment. They're highly competitive. So I don't know if there's any real opportunities, but at the moment there's a desperate need for change. I was shocked and maybe surprised the other day. I read that Sweden is going to fund a sustainable and circular economies research centre. It's a small country, similar to our own in size, but has committed 2.6 billion euro to the project. I mean, that's 2.6 billion krona, or 1 billion euro. And unless we're willing to look at that scale of investment, you know, we have to question the commitment to actually change the landscape here. And if not, how we're going to actually at least maintain some sort of parity with our European neighbours.
Okay, thanks. That's very useful and always great to have a comparison, I think, to folks' minds. So finally, Emma, did you want to say anything from the EPA's point of view?
Yeah. I mean, we've always our research program has always operated on an all-island basis. So we're the main environmental research program in Ireland. Substantial amount of funding available on an annual basis. So I wouldn't, you know, more funding is always, people always want more funding, particularly in the research area. There's limited resources to go around. So I wonder, are we collectively maximising what's there already? And certainly from the EPA's perspective, as I say, we have always had a strong all-island dimension. If you know, those that engage in our program see some gaps, we would be more than willing to hear those and to see what we can do about that within the existing structures. But yeah, I suppose it's maybe just from my perspective too easy to say we need more funding. I think we need to maximize what we have, and we've kind of heard that theme throughout the morning, be it funding or the existing structures. And if I can just pick up the point about how agencies collaborate on an all-island basis, we in the EPA are members of a 5-agency network where we work with our counterparts in Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England to share knowledge from a regulatory perspective, but also our knowledge and our advocacy work. So these themes across water quality, illegal waste, climate and biodiversity come up on a recurring basis in those discussions, which happen at heads of organization, also at director level, and then also in terms of drilling into that in terms of particular technical groups. So there is this strong collaboration piece in place. We need to really and have really focused on maintaining those, particularly north-south following Brexit, so that we continue that work. So yeah, they're the 2 points I want to make. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, and particularly thanks to every person that's contributed to the discussion and the panel. I think it shows, you know, on the basis of the excellent NESC report, which in some ways has a simple focus of how do we work, you know, on an all-island basis on these ecological issues. You know, that has so many different dimensions and strands to it. You know, there's a lot of discussion to be had, but it also shows, I think, the great goodwill and opportunities for collaboration that come from just starting with that conversation, I think. So thanks very much for that. Just to wrap up the whole of the workshop, I wanted to hand over to Dr. Helen Johnson from the National Economic and Social Council, who closed the event. Helen?
Okay, thank you very much, Geraint. It's my role now to bring this kind of fascinating and wide-ranging discussion and diverse range of perspectives to a close. I think we can all be very impressed with the collaborative work that's going on. Much of what we've heard about is project driven, and we've heard of actual and potential shared island initiatives, north-south and east-west as well. And importantly, I think that's highlighted the role of civil society, the role of academics, business people, farmers, and indeed local government. So one of the kind of key themes coming through is it's important for these bottom-up initiatives, I think, to meet the top-down policies and frameworks. And that can sometimes be a bit more challenging given the legislative and regulation constraints. And we've heard about some of those today as well. So Larry started off this morning by saying that we were entering this work on the shared island by listening and learning. And I think we now have a very good base to take this forward. And certainly I have learned a lot today, as I hope some of the rest of you have as well. So there now seems to be an urgency to move this forward and to implement a lot of the projects and proposals that we've heard about. And in some ways that might require new mindsets, which we've heard about today as well, supported by resources and adequate data and research evidence as well. So my role is also to thank a lot of the people who made today happen. So I want to thank the Minister, Eamon Ryan, for his message and for joining us for the panel discussion, and for his officials who worked around in being able to be here this morning. Also want to thank, an enormous thank you to Geraint Ellis, stalwart today, keeping the programme right on time and generating some really useful discussion. So thank you very much, Geraint. Thanks also to all the contributors today. We heard a very broad range of perspectives, so thank you for taking the time out and for keeping on time to generate such a useful discussion. Also to all of those who participated in the consultation, which we heard about this morning, and informed part of this project, those were all really important contributions. To all of you who have listened and participated, thank you for joining and for submitting your questions, and hopefully some takeaways from today as well. Of course, I couldn't finish up without thanking Jean Moore, who has led this work so professionally and so comprehensively. So really big thank you to you, Jean, for taking this work forward as far as it's come today. Also in NESC to thank Edna Jordan and her team for organising the event, and to Sinead and her Greenyard colleagues for their technical expertise. As Larry mentioned at the outset, that this report that we've heard about today, along with research on the economy, social policy and well-being, together with an in-depth exploration of cross-border cooperation in the Northwest, will inform a comprehensive report that we're preparing for the Shared Island Unit in the Department of the Taoiseach. The draft report will be considered by our council next week, and then with a view to being published in Q1 in 2022. So thank you all for your contributions and your participations, and goodbye.